This meeting is being recorded. Hi. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm going to wait a few seconds while our Zoom webinar room fills in with our attendees today. If you're here for Alta Live, a discussion on super efficient buildings of the future being built today, you are in absolutely the right place. Looks like we've got a bunch of people filling in right now, so bear with me while that happens. Why don't I get a little bit of housekeeping out of the way. Hi, everyone, and welcome, welcome. We are so happy to see you. I hope everyone had a great long weekend, are nice and rested, and are ready to make some big changes to their living spaces. If you are, thank you for joining us at Alta Live, our digital event series at Alta Journal. I'm Beth Spotswood. I'm Alta's digital editor. Today, I am so excited to welcome architects Susan Jones of Atelier Jones and EHDD's Scott Shell, who will be in conversation with Alta Journal contributor Lydia Lee. Lydia wrote this incredible article. We're going to share it with you in an email as well as in the chat section here about the incredible work that's happening with building super efficient homes. So these three are going to have a discussion, a very visual discussion on sustainable architecture, the future of the construction industry and residential design, and what we can do right now to make our homes more efficient. Susan, Scott, and Lydia will chat for about 30 minutes. I'm going to pop back at the end with questions. So please do use the Q&A button or the chat. If you're more comfortable with chat, I can grab questions out of there. And I will return at around just before 1 o'clock. Lydia will invite me back with any questions we have from the audience. If you're unfamiliar with Alta, we are a quarterly journal focused on California and the West. We cover everything from writers, history, cold cases, innovators, creators, poetry, artists, and incredible pioneers like Susan and Scott. So if you enjoy today's conversation, I hope you'll check us out at altaonline.com. Again, this whole conversation will be recorded. If you miss any part of it or want to revisit it, especially the incredible slide presentation we have for you, please check back at altaonline.com later today. It'll all be up. Plus, I'm going to email it to you. With that, I am going to get lost and turn this over to Lydia.
Thanks for that introduction, Beth. So I was so excited to do this research for Alta because, as we all know, the climate change apocalypse is upon us. And I think a lot of us are looking for ways to do whatever we can to help. So it was just incredibly inspiring to me when I talked to architects like Scott and Susan and building scientists and policymakers about all the things that we can do. And it turns out there is quite a bit that we can do that is not too expensive, is pretty straightforward, and just makes a lot of sense. So yes, there's hope for the future. And I am going to share my screen now with some quick slides. All right. Okay, let's see. How do I get into the Zoom? Oops. Wait, I need to share my screen first. Here we go. All right. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
All right. All right. So, as we all know, climate change is driven by carbon dioxide emissions. And what's been happening in recent years is that as we are moving away from coal, we have been replacing it with natural gas. Unfortunately, even though natural gas is better than coal, it's just less bad. So it still emits like half of what coal does. So even though we are trying to cut back, we are still on track to produce more carbon emissions in 2021 because we are still using fossil fuels these days. So in the home, that primarily means using natural gas for heating and cooking. And even though a lot of the natural gas that is being used worldwide is to generate electricity, it makes sense to get rid of natural gas where we can, right? And so we're using it directly in the home. It makes sense to get rid of it. Let's see. And so in California, you would think that we are really environmentally sensitive and conscious and aware and are doing everything. But actually, we are generating quite a bit of greenhouse gas emissions. So, and Scott, you were surprised by this when you first moved out here, right? Can you tell us a little bit about your education on the topic and what we're doing, what we can change here?
Oh, well, thanks, Lydia, and thanks for hosting our panel today. We really appreciate it. I grew up in Florida, and Florida, like much of the South, is dominated by electric heating and water heating and cooking and everything. And most buildings there, many, if not most buildings there, are all electric. So for me, it was just a natural kind of part of life. When I moved out here, everything for heating, hot water, cooking, even mini dryers are all powered by gas. So it's just interesting to me that a lot of those states that we think of being, maybe not on the cutting edge of sustainability, like Florida, actually are really well positioned to make this transition to a decarbonized economy in some ways easier than California or New York are.
Mm-hmm. And I know, Scott, you were also very aware of the pollution that is generated by cooking with natural gas in particular. I think that's something that you were bringing to attention to a lot of the cities up and down in the Bay Area.
Yeah, the research on that, it started at Lawrence Berkeley National Labs. They've been doing a bunch of research on the health impacts of cooking, and in particular cooking with gas. And the UCLA School of Public Health just came out with a study. And, I have kids. I do everything I can to make a healthy environment for them. And then I just realized that we're burning this gas inside our homes, cooking right next to our kids. Our furnaces and our water heaters and everything, they have to have an exhaust flue to take all that pollution out. But our cook stoves, our gas cook stoves don't. We have hoods for exhaust, but a lot of people don't use them. And actually, if you do use them, they're often not that effective. So I've gotten a lot more concerned about just the healthy air quality inside of our homes.
Right. So just from the efficiency perspective, though, there's actually a much better way of heating and cooling our homes than using natural gas, correct? I know a little bit about heat pumps. I've heard that they're very widespread in Europe and Asia, and that we are a little bit behind the curve here. Scott, can you talk a little bit about heat pumps?
A heat pump just uses the refrigeration cycle of compressing a refrigerant. And we all have them in our homes. Our refrigerator is a heat pump, and it just moves heat out of your refrigerator and makes it cool. An air conditioner is a heat pump as well. It's just a one-way heat pump. What we are using the term heat pump actually can work in both directions. So it's like an air conditioner with a reversing valve, and it can make heating or cooling. So it's a very well-known technology. It's been around for a long time. It just hasn't spread geographically around the country, but it's used all over the South. It's used widely in the Northwest, and a very, very solid, predictable, mature technology.
And do you have any sense of why it hasn't caught on in California as much?
Largely for policy reasons. For a long time, California really promoted gas use, and in our codes specifically. I think the California Energy Commission is now changing that, and they're now moving pretty solidly in the direction of electrification of buildings. And the new building code that's coming out shortly is going to emphasize that in a lot of ways. So it's been a lot of policy reasons, and but I think that's getting ready to change pretty quickly.
Great. So this is a fun slide graphic here, because you can see how electric heat pumps stack up to other traditional forms of heating. And people do talk about how gas heat is very efficient. And it's true that when you're using gas, most of the energy, just about all the energy in the gas gets converted to heat. So that's what they mean when they talk about how it's almost 100% efficient. But with an electric heat pump, because you're using the electricity to pull extra heat out of the air, then you get this, big fat arrow here, where you're basically getting 300 to 400% more heat coming out, as opposed to just the 1-to-1 ratio that you would get with natural gas. So it sounds like a really amazing technology, and I have not experienced it myself. Susan or Scott, have you had any personal experience with heat pumps?
We use them all the time, Lydia. I think every building I've lived in since I moved to Seattle sometime, I don't know, 34 years ago, had heat pumps. And but the cool thing is they've gotten even more efficient than you and Scott are describing. Like in that 30 years, they've probably tripled their efficiency. And the technology is just getting better and better. So it makes a lot of sense to use it. I mean, up here in Washington State, we feel super lucky because an electric heat pump is a no-brainer when we've got hydroelectric power, which I know is a really unique thing in Washington. So that's not easy for everybody to replicate in the next, I'll just go out and build a dam. But it's a really great technology. And we've had virtually maintenance free, they wear out maybe every 20 years, but that's pretty much, standard. It's a really great system.
Oh.
Lydia, I know you're in the Bay Area like I am, and it used to be that most people didn't have air conditioning in the Bay Area, but it seems to be getting hotter and hotter. And then in particular, last year with all the fires, the air quality was so bad we couldn't open up our house at night to cool it down. So we bit the bullet last summer and put in air conditioning with a heat pump. And it's been fabulous. We now, if it's one of those smoky days, we can put the good filter in and have cool air and still sleep without being too hot. And the heating this winter worked just fabulous. So we've been super pleased with it.
That's great to hear. Yeah, no, this past summer was pretty scary in terms of the heat and the smoke, we should say, right? So that takes me to Passive House, which is a system for building houses that is a little more high tech than sort of traditional building methods. So let's see, where do we get into discussion with Passive House? It's not directly related to heat pumps, but is another sort of more advanced way of building, just in the same way that heat pumps are slightly more advanced in terms of heating, right? Or a big leap, we should probably say. So Susan, your own house is built to Passive House principles. So can you walk us through the basics of Passive House?
Yeah, and I want to stress that, Passive House is a really regulated and really highly technical system, but there are still things that we can all learn from it. And I sort of feel like I took the light, easy way out and did a few things that were Passive House, but they're really some basic things if you're designing a house. And this great diagram that Lydia, you're showing, really talks about it with, for instance, south facing windows is really great in the winter when you need more heating inside. But then also it's not so great in the summer, as we know, because we want to reduce the need for air conditioning if we were to have it, because that draws extra energy into the heat pump, for instance. So you might have south facing windows, but then be really careful to have overhangs that protect the sun from coming in at the summer when the sun is really at a high level. And so one of the basic things people can do if they're redesigning a new addition to their house, or maybe an accessible dwelling unit on the back of their house, or even maybe designing a new house, is you can do energy modeling. And that's a really great thing that kind of models what the designer team is thinking about how it's going to perform on all different levels. But the other thing that's shown on this diagram is super insulation and the specialty window. And those sound kind of like scary concepts, but they're triple glazed. I mean, we all made the transition, at least, some of us can remember when we had single pane and then you go double pane and now you're going triple pane. So those, if your windows are failing and you said, wow, I want to do something that's more sustainable, you could replace them with a triple glazed window. And what that does is it keeps more of the heat out in the summer and more of the heat in the winter. And it really keeps the temperature more constant on the inside. It might not reduce the need for air conditioning completely, but it'll reduce it. Yeah. And the same thing with super insulation. Let's say you needed to replace your roof. Well, you could replace the roof, but just go down a little bit deeper and replace the insulation or add insulation on top of that existing insulation for your roof. And that, again, keeps it really, the sun is less able to penetrate through, and the cold is less able to penetrate through in in the winter months. So those are some simple things that can happen there. And there's a lot of other more complex things about airtight and the detailing for passive house. We tried to do as much as we could of that, but really for a new house, you really go down to the foundation and under the foundation. You might have heard about insulating under the slab and putting a lot of insulation underneath there. And then there's this really great ventilation system, which is kind of very much related to the heat pump. It says up here in the corner, ventilation with heat recovery. And so that's where you have a ventilation system that you still, because the house is so tight, you want to be able to have good ventilation for healthy houses in there. Makes sense. But instead of bringing all this cold air in the winter, you bring it through the kind of a modified heat pump, and it recovers the heat from the air that's going out, and it heats up the colder air coming in. Anyway, that gets kind of geeky and technical, but it is a pretty good system, and sometimes they're called ERVs, ventilation recovery systems, and HRVs, heating recovery ventilation systems. And it's all stuff that you can have, architects and engineers help you with when you're thinking about renovating or building a new house. And it's really feasible.
Yeah, I think that the ventilation system becomes particularly appealing when you think about trying to keep smoke out too, right? Because you can add, if you have a system, an airtight house, and you're controlling the air coming in and out very carefully, and extracting the heat and the cooling from it, you can also make sure you purify that air as well. And so you just have clean air coming into the house. I know that is sounding like a huge plus looking at the summer ahead, right? Fingers crossed.
Totally. Yeah, I'd highly recommend looking into it, doing a modified passive house. It's a great thing.
Yeah, and someone who was not able to join us for a panel today, Andrew McAllister, who's the California Energy Commission, actually built a completely certified passive house, and he had put together a nice video about it, which I will include in the chat later on, which does a good job like going through the details. And it's actually, he also saved his foundation, so it's a little bit of a renovation as well, and he put in a whole rainwater capture system. So there's a lot of fun stuff in his house. And he, according to Andrew, this is the wave of the future. Passive houses, where we're all heading to. So, and then a lot of people think, oh, if I build the house this way and have all these bells and whistles that make it energy efficient, it's going to cost, exponentially more. And apparently the good news is that those technologies have come down a lot in cost. So you're no longer looking at a huge addition to your house, renovation or house construction bill. And Scott, is that something that you found in your experience over the years, that the costs have been coming down?
Yeah, that's what we've seen, and that's what the studies, the analysis studies that the Energy Commission has done have shown. It kind of makes sense if you already have to have electricity coming to your house, and if you don't have to pay for all the piping, gas piping to come into your house and trenching that and paying for the meter, and then having a separate set of pipes inside your house, and then a flue going out through your roof. It's just simpler. We've seen a number of projects, including at the University of California, where we do a lot of work, where they've been design build competition and the lowest price wins. And they've built a lot of new student housing, and it's all gone electric just because it's lower cost to build and lower cost to operate.
Very cool. So I think you're going to tell us about some of these buildings, right? I'm going to hand over the mic to you, and you can just tell me when to advance the slides. How about that?
Oh, okay, fabulous. So as I said, I grew up in Florida, and most buildings were electric there, but as I moved out here and started practicing, that was not normal at all. We typically used gas for heating. So this was a little renovation project we did for an electrical engineer, David Kaneda, and he wanted to go all electric, and we encouraged that because this is when climate change was becoming a topic. And so we had a great mechanical engineer, Peter Rumsey. We designed this all electric building with a heat pump for heating and cooling, no gas service to the building, and it worked out great. And so next slide. And so then that gave us the confidence to scale up to a little bit bigger building, the Packard Foundation. Their board really wanted to address climate change and to be an example. So working with them, and again with Peter Rumsey, we designed this all electric office building for them. And we just realized that this was something that could scale up. And so then we started doing it not just for these clients that really wanted to push the envelope, but for lots of clients. And you can go to the next one. And those included the Exploratorium, a science museum in San Francisco. It's a big project. Yeah, this one's a little bit different. Instead of exchanging heat with the air, we exchange it with the bay water. But it's absolutely a fabulous thing, and they're really trying to show off the science behind the systems and make it a learning experience. Next slide. And since that time, it's become just pretty much our standard approach. We don't use gas unless we really have to, or if a client's insisting on it. We're trying to go all electric for our projects. This is a project in a cold climate in Boulder, Colorado, and it's run 100% on heat pumps, and it has enough solar panels on it to generate all its own electricity. And the next slide, and I think this might be the last one. We've done a whole series of schools and that are all electric, and they install solar on the roof, often with the power purchase agreement, so they have no power bill going forward, and they can invest all their money into the students and into the classrooms and not into paying the utility. So it's just been a really rock solid approach for us. Our clients have liked it. We're getting really high scores when we ask the occupants how they like it. And so, that's what we're trying to do.
Great. Oh, here's another one.
Oh, last school, Marin Country Day School, right next to me here in Corte Madera. Again, and this one actually, Susan, we use some of the passive house principles. It has exterior insulation and air sealing and heat recovery ventilators on it.
Awesome. It looks great.
So we're gonna switch gears for just a moment. So in addition to making houses more energy efficient by insulating them or going through a formal program like Passive House and switching to all electric appliances and heating, another important way that architects and people can think about houses is to consider the building materials they're using. So this is a pie chart of carbon emissions by, I think, the whole industrial sector. And you can see that operating buildings takes up a big chunk. That's that mustard colored wedge. But then we have this big chunk that's devoted to producing materials, the concrete, steel, and aluminum that we use in our big buildings. And this is still relevant for houses because you might have a concrete driveway, or you might have the option of reusing your foundation instead of pouring a new foundation, or saving the broken concrete and using that as the base for your next project. Because making concrete is one of the most energy intensive manufacturing processes out there. It just takes incredible amounts of energy to break all those chemical bonds to create your artificial rock, essentially, that you then recreate. So some people refer to this as the embodied energy of materials. And this means that even before you move into a house or a building, it will already have a carbon footprint right off the bat because of what's being used to construct it. And this is an issue that Susan's been working on for quite some time. So I'm going to turn it over to her now. And Susan, just tell me when you want me to move through the slides.
Well, first of all, Lydia, that was an awesome explanation of embodied energy of a private structure. And I really thank you, because it's a complicated subject to introduce and to understand. And so I get to tell a story, but you did all the work by doing, the actual description of what we were trying to do. And it's basically trying to reduce that other pie chart piece, that 22.7% of our, building materials, to lower our carbon footprint for the whole construction industry. And in my case with this slide, thank you very much, Lydia, it started with a house that we built for my family in 2015. And the house was made out of cross-laminated timber. It was one of the very first in the whole US. And I had no idea how the journey of making this house would become this huge study of I'm going to call it ecology, which is what these fancy Greek words add up to. It's the basis of how we reinvent our relationships and understand our relationships to the earth. And it's based on this word house. And for me, it kind of came true. Like building this house was a way to understand the entire ecology of wood, especially from the forest, sustainable forestry, all the way to mass timber high rises that would substitute for concrete and steel. You can go to the next slide. So it was really an exciting thing to use this house as an experiment, to really understand how to build with this new material. And just so it's right behind me, and I will show another picture that Lydia is going to bring up. But it's how to reduce the impact of the concrete and steel in our buildings that sometimes are used for houses. Yes, less so, as Lydia mentioned. It's more of a light wood frame, especially out on the West Coast. But a lot of times on the East Coast and in Europe, houses are made out of concrete and steel and less out of wood. But we're trying to reduce that carbon footprint. And also, I have to say, we all loved it living in it. My husband, Marco, our two kids, Rogan and Domenica, who were in high school when we finished it in 2015. And they've been recently living there as COVID refugees for the last year. So next slide. The main material that this house was built out of, you can also see it right behind me, is mass laminated timber, or we sometimes just call it CLT. And this photo is great. It's the structure for the house, and it's also its interior finish for the house, and it's right here. It's made out of these layers of 2x6 lumber, which is shown here, and they're all laminated together with really strong non-toxic polyurethane adhesives. And when we built the house, it was like walking into a pine forest for months afterwards. It smelled so good when we walked in. But like I said, it was a demonstration house, and really the whole point of building it was to help lower our carbon footprint for our entire construction industry. And to do that, we wanted to try to promote making this higher value wood product, so it would help deep into the supply chain, the foresters who cut down these trees, the lumber folks who made them into 2x4s, and provide jobs for all those folks that would make it more advantageous to keep our forest clean of all of the things, the debris that causes forest fire, and really replant and keep our sustainable woods there. So next slide. But to really make an impact, I realized as my small firm, we really needed to go make this at a bigger scale, because a house is really possible and it's a really good one, but it's not the whole story. And so in 2016, the American Institute of Architects asked me if I would sit on this code committee for the International Code Committee for Tall Wood Buildings to change these codes. And it was a huge decision because I'm not a gigantic code person, but for 2 or 3 years, I sat on this committee all pro bono, and helped with firefighters and fire professionals and fire chiefs and concrete and steel code professionals. And I ended up really sharing my time and my knowledge about mass timber to help write 200 pages of new administrative building code as in a collaborative environment as we possibly could get to. So next slide. And today that code is law, and it's law in today at least 5 states, I think in California as well, and it's available for all jurisdictions and project teams to be able to use across the country. And my office, my architectural office here in Seattle, Atelier Jones, we're getting to build with it. And we have this cool opportunity of a lifetime, really, to design and build with the very codes I helped write, and to test them with contractors and engineers and all of our collaborative partners that it takes to build a really large, in this case, apartment house building. We're going to start construction in a few months on this new workforce housing apartment building. It's made out of 8 stories of mass timber, and it's going to emit, we project, up to 40% less greenhouse gases than if this big 8-story urban building was built out of concrete. And we're going to be doing this other demonstration project, this next one, to help show that we can really lower our carbon footprint of our entire construction industry and keep the forest growing sustainably using local wood. So next slide. We really also hope and believe that it will provide a more beautiful and more equitable experiences for people in the apartment house to experience the same incredible beauty, natural biophilic beauty of the wood, of living in nature that I get to in my house. And in these small studios, they about 400 square foot in the heart of urban Seattle. I just love to imagine the idea of the light falling gently into those studios and the sound of buses and cars and sirens fading in the distance as you walk into your apartment room and it's smelling like the forest surrounded by soft natural wood. So I'm really excited about these opportunities to build with this new material to help our entire construction industry move and lower its carbon footprint, and hopefully to inspire people, whether it's building small with a house like I did to start with, or building larger buildings in metropolitan areas that will help house a lot more people. But it's been a really exciting journey, and yeah, it's really an honor to be able to tell you about it and tell all of your viewers about it. Thank you, Lydia, for asking.
Great. So at this point, I think we're ready for questions. Beth, are you there? I'm going to stop my share.
I'm here. Hi. From my not efficient house in Mill Valley, California. I am in my childhood home, and this is not the house I live in right now, but the house I've come to for peace and quiet to do this today. And I think that my first question, I think for both Scott and Susan, is what is something that someone like me or my parents who's own this house can do right now without kind of starting from scratch, but can you come up with a handful of things, maybe 3 things that each of us can do today to make our homes a little bit more, without tearing them down and rebuilding, to make our homes a little bit more efficient, a little bit more forward thinking for the future? I'll start with Scott.
So it's a good question, Beth. Thank you for that. I was struck this year with all of the pandemic and quarantines that our emissions didn't drop lower than they did. Our emissions actually set a new record this year. And it kind of convinced me that we really need to change the way our society is built and run from an energy point of view, and not just not rely solely on behavioral aspects like turning down your thermostat. So I would encourage you, this is a little hard, but I would encourage people to think longer term and think about making a plan to electrify their home appliances. So the heating and hot water are the 2 big ones. And if you don't need a new furnace or a heat pump or air conditioner or hot water heater right now, you can still do things. The next time you have an electrician over at your house to do whatever, go ahead and have them run a circuit for a future hot water heater so that when it does give out, you're ready to hook it up. Once they're there, it's not that much more expensive for them to do it. Go ahead and have them run a circuit from your electric panel to maybe a future electric car charger, just so that when you are ready to get a new car, you don't have to have that expense done at that time. And there's a great guide, the Pocket Guide to All Electric Retrofits. I'll put a link in the chat, and it sort of walks you through the whole process of how to electrify your home and get off of fossil fuels.
Okay, Susan.
Those are great suggestions, Scott. And I'd like to look at that how to retrofit panel too. Yeah, the Pocket Guide, that sounds awesome. And I think Scott brings up some really, really nice points. We could take it further by adding, it really depends on where you live, right? So if you're in a space that has a lot of sun, which I assume all of you in California do, because we don't in the winter, I know that, it just seems like solar is going to be ubiquitous. So yes, it does cost some money to retrofit your house, but as Scott said, you can roll it out slowly. You can, pre-wire for solar panels, and then maybe the next couple of years you put some solar panels on, and then there's all kinds of community programs that allow you to sell that solar energy back to the grid, and then you can take it in off-site times when it's cloudy, etc. So I would take his comment one step further and say, think about those solar panels, and yeah, the electric vehicles are really, we're thinking, we've had these cars in our house for like 10 years, and we're just waiting for the electric vehicles to get really ubiquitous. And I can see easily just plugging it into the outside outlets of our house. And maybe if we need to retrofit it for 220, that would be okay too. But I think those are great suggestions. The other thing is, relative to where everybody lives, if you have air conditioning, Great. Well, let's find out ways to reduce the air conditioning. So going back to that passive house diagram, maybe you know where the sun is coming in the summer, and it's causing you to turn up that or turn down that air conditioning and use more. So think about putting shading on your house in places where the sun is coming in, or think about ways if you live in a colder climate, which you might not in California. So we kind of ignore this piece, but assuming you turn the heat on in the winter, you have some need to reduce that. So if you have the opposite problem, you have some heavy blinds or heavy shading devices on the outside of your house that actually prevent the winter sun from coming in to help heat your house, because you do have sun in the winter down in LA, you lucky folks, or California. We don't up it here, but it's a great way to just let the sun do its job. And if it comes through the windows, just not open windows, but just allows it to come in. Great way to let more heat in just naturally from the sun. So those are a couple just smart, just simple ways, I think, to work with it. And then, of course, if you want to, get more aggressive, I think I talked about, newer windows or better insulation, if you're doing retrofits or renovations already, and potentially that heat pump idea, which is a great one, but lots of things to do.
Yeah, now we're getting lots more questions. Okay. Susan, let's start with, I'll ask you this one because you brought up CLT. How long will CLT structures last compared to concrete and steel?
Yeah, I saw that comment. That's a really good one, Robin. And it's, CLT has been around in Europe for 30 years, and it was invented by these really amazing Austrian and German scientists and architects and engineers there. And so there's been structures that have been built in Europe for at least 30 years, and they show no sign of any degradation. I mean, remember, all of this wood is covered up by insulation on the outside, or in this case, a window out there. So it's not exposed to the water. So in our estimation professionally, we've talked to like national appraisal institutes and things, and insurance companies, and there's been huge amounts of fire tests done on this product, on this new material. And, we think it's easily 100-year building and possibly more. I'd like to say 200-year building, but I don't have any proof for that. That's intuition. So if it's detailed right and it doesn't get exposed to water, there's no reason, just like the temples in Japan and some of those beautiful temples in Norway, there's no reason why this massive wood material can't last for, I'll be bold, 1,000 years if it's well cared for.
Okay, Robin, 1,000 years.
Don't put that in the chat though for me.
I love this question. We're going a little bit over. I know that Susan and Scott, you guys are crazy busy, but Susan asked an incredible question here. I can only dream about being a homeowner. And I think that that's true for a lot of us on the West Coast. Never mind owning a home that encompasses my desire to lower my carbon footprint. Can this truly be affordable, or even affordable to rent? And maybe not immediately today, but in the near future, in our lifetime. Can this?
Oh yeah, Beth. Once this apartment building that is going to start construction this fall, it's made for, it's called workforce housing. And so that little unit that I showed you is not a high luxury unit. It's made for anybody, who needs a 400 square foot unit. It's not huge, but the mass timber did not add a big cost. Building in cities, housing in cities is really expensive, for all the reasons you just mentioned, Beth, but those units are designed for middle income folks, people making between 60 and 120% of average medium income. So absolutely, I can't wait to, talk to my owner, sign a contract, come over to Seattle, Beth, live in that space. It would be great.
Scott, I'll kind of dive over to you. Ed lives in a 1926. I hope that all of these comments are like, everyone's going to describe their house. And now we have two super accomplished architects. You can just analyze all of our homes for us. Ed lives in a 1926 Spanish house in LA. He had a huge gas gravity heater replaced with a more efficient HVAC system for the air conditioning a couple of years ago. Who can I see for getting the house assessed for a variety of overall improvements like insulation, new windows, solar? If you can't hire Scott Shell to come and wander around your house, how do you do this other than attending an event like this and kind of going through this? Is there a?
Yeah, it's a real question. I think I don't know if this is a California phenomenon or not, but it can be surprisingly difficult to find people to come work on your house for you. You know, they seem to be really busy and often have trouble taking time for you. My go-to, to be perfectly honest, is to look on Yelp, and I'll search like an insulation company on Yelp, and I'll pick like the top few reviews and read what they have to say, and then I'll give them a call and ask them, say, hey, this is what I have, can you help me? And I think it just gives you some confidence that you're not just calling, and well, we don't have yellow pages anymore, but you're not just calling a number out of the yellow pages, right? You actually are getting some referrals. So it's easy to do. There's really good people out there, and it can make a huge difference in energy use, carbon emissions, and the comfort and health of your home.
Sorry, Susan, I was going to jump in with a thought.
Yeah, go.
So there are people who do residential energy audits, and I have never worked with one myself, but I know that they exist, and there's also a group called ResNet, right, that has HERS raters that will come out and do like, what can you improve in your house, and like how much, you know, what is the cost benefit analysis for making these improvements, right? So they're, in terms of like just figuring out what's going to give you the biggest bang for your, you know, energy improvement dollar. I think the energy auditors are the way to go there, right? Would you guys agree?
I totally agree with that, Lydia. We have in the Pacific Northwest, we have a really big sub-industry of both energy consultants, like you're mentioning, as well as solar consultants, and then even contractors who are doing small residential remodels, et cetera, who really specialize in this area. And I totally agree with Scott. They're really busy right now, but that's a good thing. And they're hopefully going to be able to expand their business and hire more people to help more of us do these kind of renovations and retrofits. But just take a look, Google energy audits, you know, sustainable house retrofits. There's a whole kind of sub-industry of folks. And I'm probably, if there's not enough in California, I'm sure somebody in Washington state you can help out even from a distance, because it's all climate specific. They all tend to do it, especially that energy modeling that I mentioned. You can even go really geeky and do the energy modeling, and passive house consultants are a great way to start, and you can pay them for their time. And then, you know, maybe you don't go all the way passive, but it's a really important way to understand better what you have existing. It's a great tool.
Okay, we have two more questions that I want to get in, because I think that these are great. One is electric heat pumps. Are they noisy? Hathaway wants to get one and doesn't want neighbor complaints.
No problem. I've never heard any noise. I don't know, Scott, have you? I have just, they're just not. They're just super quiet.
I think they are variable speeds, so the compressor speeds up and down depending on how hard it's working. So on a really, really cold night, it'll make more noise outside of the condenser unit. So I would just be cautious where I put that outdoor condenser unit. So maybe don't put it right next to your bedroom window. Maybe put it next to your garage or areas where you aren't sleeping.
That's a good point. There are regulations to pull it, I think, 5 feet back from neighboring property lines, just in case. But and we often have them on the roof, so that you don't really hear anything as well. But it's something to think about. Yeah.
Okay, last question: solar panels. Now, let me just toot my own Alta horn here. I did a solar battery article for Alta that I will include in our email, but Matt and Dan are getting into a conversation here in the Q&A. One big disincentive for passive solar is fade from UV. What strategies can be used to get passive heat gain without damage to furnishings?
Yeah, so I'm looking at the chat right here, and there's obviously some good information going back and forth. And it sounds like Matt has some older windows, which, you know, might be great. And I'm sure if they're probably going to just hang in there, those Pella windows, but they don't probably have a low E coating that the new glass glazing comes with. But it kind of goes back to that comment I made earlier about thinking really carefully about overhangs outside your house to help prevent this kind of direct solar gain, or potentially shade. Like here's my movable shade that I move this bag around and I move it wherever I don't want the glare to come in, you know, just being attentive to your house. It's like a musical instrument. And when the sun moves around it, you sometimes have to have different strategies to help deal with it. And, you know, one of them is just to be careful, like where you put those furnishings, and just being conscious of the relationship of the sun to your interior world. And, you know, I'll be honest, that's kind of one of the things I love about what we do is we are more, it puts these strategies, put us in tune with the natural world. And it's really amazing to be aware of that and how it affects how we live.
With that, I feel like we have a lot of action items today. I've learned a ton, even more from Lydia's original article that features both of you. I gonna have to tear down my house to rebuild. But I am so grateful, especially for everyone for joining. A big thank you to our guests, Susan Jones, Scott Schell. Lydia, thank you so much for your one. This is one of many Lydia Lee articles in Alta Journal. So please continue to check us out. I'm really grateful for everyone. Next week, we totally switch gears. We have a novelist, Marissa Silver will join us for a conversation about her new book, The Mystery. So please join us for that. But in the meantime, stay safe, stay sustainable, and thank you so much for joining us. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.